damn it, Gump! You're a goddamn genius. That's the most outstanding answer I've ever heard. You must have a goddamn IQ of 160.
We all thought we knew Forrest Gump. It's been studied for decades, yet Forrest Gump still finds ways to fool even its biggest fans.
From that day on, if I was going anywhere, I was running.
And
Behind its heartwarming story lie mistakes, secrets, and contradictions that slip past millions. And today, we're exposing the details most people never caught, starting with a blooper that quietly rewrites history. The school bus scene looks simple enough. Young Forrest trying to find a seat, rejected by cold faces, until Jenny finally lets him sit beside her. But here's the part almost no one realized. Two of those kids who turned him away weren't actors at all. The boy who sneers and says, "You can't sit here," was Alexander Zemeckis, the director's own son. And the little girl who follows up with her own rejection? That was Elizabeth Hanks, Tom Hanks' daughter. It's a clever inside joke, but it adds a hidden layer of irony. The moment that could have felt like a small humiliation for Forrest was actually crafted with the help of family. Literally the children of the men who were shaping the movie. And it makes Jenny's kindness stand out even more. Because right after those rejections, Jenny leans over and saves him with a line fans never forget.
You can sit here if you want.
You can sit here if you want. What the audience didn't know is that this single act of kindness became the backbone of Forrest's life story. And it all started with a pair of cameos most fans never noticed. Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. In the movie, Bubba's dream of starting a shrimp business becomes Forrest's mission, and it feels like just another touching piece of fiction.
what you do is you just drag your nets along the bottom. On a good day, you can catch over 100 pounds of shrimp. Everything goes all right.
But here's the twist. That made-up company didn't stay fictional for long. After the film's massive success, Paramount partnered with a restaurant group to launch the real Bubba Gump Shrimp Company. What began as a clever nod to the movie turned into an empire. More than 40 restaurants across the globe, from California to Japan. And here's where it gets even stranger. One of those restaurants in Hawaii became the unlikely stage for a Hollywood discovery. In the year 2000, a young waiter cracking jokes and charming tourists caught the eye of a director. That waiter was Chris Pratt. Serving shrimp at Bubba Gump literally opened the door to his acting career. So what started as a tribute to a character who never made it home from Vietnam ended up reshaping Hollywood itself. The chain made millions, Forrest's legacy leapt off the screen, and one of today's biggest movie stars got his first break by handing out menus with Bubba Gump written on them. But if a fake shrimp company could change real lives, what happened behind the camera almost pushed the film past its breaking point. Gump's Southern accent. Forrest Gump's voice is unforgettable. Slow, gentle, and instantly recognizable. But Tom Hanks didn't just invent it out of thin air. Instead, he borrowed it from the young actor who played Forrest as a boy, Michael Connor Humphreys. Humphreys grew up in Mississippi, and his natural drawl was so unique, so real, that it became the key to Forrest's entire persona. Hanks studied the child actor's speech patterns closely, mimicking every rhythm and inflection. Instead of the adult leading the performance, the younger actor set the tone, an unusual reversal in Hollywood. The result? Perfect continuity between young Forrest and grown-up Forrest. Viewers barely notice the handoff, but it's what makes the story feel seamless, like we're watching one life instead of two actors. Critics often point to Hanks' accent as risky. It could have come across as forced or cartoonish, but because it was rooted in something authentic, it worked. That dedication paid off with an Academy Award for Best Actor, cementing Hanks' performance as one of the greatest in film history. But for all the craft that went into his voice, the real gamble wasn't how Forrest sounded. It was how Tom Hanks got paid. There were no wages for Tom Hanks. At first, Hanks was offered a traditional salary for the role, safe, guaranteed, predictable, but he turned it down. Instead, he struck a deal for a percentage of the film's profits. At the time, it was a risky move. No one could predict if Forrest Gump would be a hit or a flop, and if the movie tanked, Hanks would have walked away with almost nothing. Hollywood is filled with cautionary tales of stars who gambled on box office numbers and lost big. But this time, the risk turned into a windfall. Forrest Gump became a global phenomenon, earning over $678 million worldwide. Thanks to his deal, Hanks didn't just make a good payday. He reportedly walked away with around $65 million, far more than any upfront salary would have given him. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes twist that mirrors Forrest's own story. Simple choices leading to extraordinary outcomes. But while money made headlines, another detail stayed hidden for years. It involved a familiar face and a voice that fans didn't even know they were hearing: the cameos of Elvis and Kurt Russell. Not every secret in Forrest Gump was about money or risk. Some were hidden in plain sight, in the voices we thought we recognized. Take the scene where a young Elvis Presley stays at Forrest's house, watching his awkward dance moves and turning them into the legendary hip shake. On screen, Elvis is played by actor Peter Dobson. But the voice coming out of his mouth? That wasn't Dobson at all. The lines were secretly recorded by Kurt Russell. At the time, no one outside the crew knew. Russell had already played Elvis years earlier in a TV biopic, which made him the perfect stand-in. Director Robert Zemeckis slipped him in quietly, replacing the original track that wasn't working. And for more than a decade, fans had no idea. It wasn't until 2016 that Russell casually admitted it in an interview. By then, the film was already a classic, and the reveal felt like a hidden Easter egg dropped years too late. It's the kind of cameo that would never stay secret in today's internet age, but somehow, back then, it slipped by unnoticed. And that wasn't the only slip. The film also played fast and loose with history itself, blending Forrest into timelines that never quite lined up. Jimmy Carter's heat exhaustion. The magic of Forrest Gump is how it weaves one man into America's biggest moments. But that trick sometimes comes with cracks. There's a quick scene where Forrest runs past a barbershop, and the TV inside reports that President Jimmy Carter has collapsed from heat exhaustion.
President Carter, suffering from heat exhaustion, fell into the arms of...
When I got there?
That actually happened in real life, back in September of 1979. The detail feels clever, grounding Forrest's journey in real history. But here's the problem. According to the film, Forrest began his cross-country run on July 5, 1976. That's 3 years before Carter even became president, which means the timing doesn't fit. Forrest couldn't have overheard that news when the movie suggests he did. It's a small moment, but it's one of those bloopers that slips by because the story flows so well. Most people never stop to do the math. They're too busy watching Forrest run. Still, it shows how the film bends reality for the sake of story. And Carter wasn't the only president Forrest crossed paths with in ways that history says he couldn't. Then the schoolhouse door. Another moment where Forrest brushes against history comes during the Civil Rights Movement. In the film, Forrest is shown at the University of Alabama in 1963, when Governor George Wallace tried to block black students from enrolling. The real event was a standoff scene on national television. Wallace literally stood in the schoolhouse door, defying a federal order to desegregate the university. President John F. Kennedy had to send in federal marshals to make sure Vivian Malone and James Hood could safely enter. It was one of the most infamous clashes of the era. In the movie, Forrest just happens to be on campus as it unfolds, watching quietly in the background. It fits the film's style, the idea of Forrest stumbling into history again and again. But this scene is more than a clever editing trick. It highlights the contrast between Forrest's innocent view of the world and the raw tension of one of America's darkest chapters. It's a reminder of how the movie often glossed over conflict to keep the tone light. And yet, the war scenes would go in the opposite direction, chaotic, relentless, and far more brutal than people expected. Water war scenes on golf course. The Vietnam sequences in Forrest Gump feel dense, dangerous, and overwhelmingly real. The heavy rains, the mud, the jungle ambushes, they look like something straight out of a war documentary. But the truth is, those scenes weren't shot anywhere near Vietnam. Most of them were filmed on a golf course in South Carolina. Wide, open fairways were transformed into thick jungle using CGI and carefully placed palm trees. What looks like endless rainforest on screen was really just carefully dressed greens and bunkers. It's one of those clever Hollywood tricks that works because of contrast. Viewers never question it. They're too caught up in Forrest carrying wounded soldiers or in the chaos of battle. The trick was seamless, but it also shows how far the production went to create authenticity without ever leaving the US. And even more surprising, the early drafts of these scenes were darker, with details that the army itself fought to keep off the screen. The original Vietnam sequences. The Vietnam scenes we see in Forrest Gump already carry a heavy weight, but the original script went even darker, so dark that the US Army pushed back against it. In the first draft, Forrest's entire platoon was made up of soldiers with low IQs. This wasn't just fiction. It was based on a real controversial military practice during the war, where men with lower test scores were sometimes grouped together and sent overseas. It was a detail the filmmakers initially wanted to include to ground the story in harsh reality. But the Army strongly objected. They didn't want a blockbuster film suggesting that America's troops were assembled that way. Under pressure, the idea was scrapped. The final cut kept Forrest and Bubba as unique, while the rest of the platoon was shown as ordinary soldiers. Even with the changes, historians later praised the Vietnam sequences. The ambush where Forrest carries Bubba was cited as one of the most realistic depictions of Viet Cong tactics, sudden, unseen, and devastating. The relentless rain and slang like humping were also spot on. So while the film softened some of the harsher truths, traces of reality still bled through. And back home, another part of the film leaned on something far less grim, a single prop that became one of the most famous in movie history. A conserved bench. Few props in cinema are as instantly recognizable as the bench where Forrest tells his story. At first glance, it looks like a simple park bench in Savannah, Georgia. But the truth is, it was anything but ordinary. For the film, the production team actually built fiberglass benches and placed them in Chippewa Square, choosing the spot for its picturesque backdrop. To make the shots work, Savannah police even reversed traffic flow around the square, so the camera could capture Forrest waiting for the bus without distraction. 4 identical benches were created, rotated through different shots as Forrest shared his life story. When filming wrapped, one was donated to the Savannah History Museum, where it now sits behind glass, guarded like a piece of treasure. Fans from around the world still travel there just to see it. The other benches? Their whereabouts are a mystery. Some turned up in auctions for staggering prices, while others simply disappeared into private collections. Much like the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, this ordinary-looking bench has become a priceless relic. But while the bench became iconic, another object in the film carried even deeper meaning, floating gently into one of the most symbolic scenes in movie history. The feather scene. Before Forrest ever speaks a word, the film opens with a single white feather drifting through the air. It looks like a piece of CGI magic, but that's another trick. The feather was real. The crew filmed it against a blue screen, capturing take after take as it floated unpredictably. Later, editors stitched those shots together, guiding its movement into the graceful path we see on screen. The result feels almost too perfect. A feather carried by fate until it lands at Forrest's feet. That little moment set the tone for the entire movie. The feather represents Forrest's life. Simple, directionless, carried by chance winds into extraordinary places. It reappears at the end, just after Forrest sends his son to school, tying his story together with a reminder that life can't always be explained, only lived. Audiences remember the running, the shrimp, the love story with Jenny, but the feather is the film's soul, a real object, handled with cinematic illusion that became a symbol of destiny itself. And while this floating feather captured meaning, another detail in the film was less poetic. In fact, it was a physical alteration to one of its most memorable characters. Prosthetic lip, Bubba. Bubba may have had the shrimp knowledge, but most fans never realized one key detail about his look wasn't real at all. Actor Mykelti Williamson, who played Bubba, wore a prosthetic lip throughout filming. The exaggerated lower lip became part of his distinctive appearance, but it wasn't natural. It was carefully crafted by the makeup team. They built and tested versions until it blended seamlessly with his face, believable enough that most viewers never questioned it. What could have easily looked cartoonish ended up working because of Williamson's performance. His soft delivery, his obsession with shrimp, and his quiet bond with Forrest made Bubba more than a gimmick. He became a character people loved, And just like Bubba's shrimp list, the casting list for Forrest Gump had plenty of surprises too, because several of Hollywood's biggest stars almost played the roles we now think of as untouchable. Alternative cast members. Tom Hanks feels inseparable from Forrest Gump today, but he wasn't the studio's first choice. In fact, several huge names turned it down before the role landed in his lap. John Travolta, Bill Murray, and Chevy Chase were all offered the part. Each one walked away, worried the character might not work or unsure about the script. Travolta later admitted he regretted the decision, especially after seeing the Film Sweep Awards in Define a Generation. It wasn't just Forrest. The role of Bubba nearly went to David Alan Grier, Ice Cube, or even Dave Chappelle. Cube declined, worried about how the part would portray disability. Chappelle thought the movie wouldn't succeed, something he later joked about, calling it one of his biggest career missteps. Even Jenny's role was shopped around. Jodie Foster, Demi Moore, and Nicole Kidman were all considered before Robin Wright stepped in and delivered a performance that earned award nominations. And for Lieutenant Dan, Kevin Bacon was on the shortlist before Gary Sinise gave the role its unforgettable edge. Looking back, it's hard to imagine anyone else in these roles, but the movie we know almost had an entirely different cast. And while casting came down to choices, the next detail came down to pure endurance, even as Tom Hanks battled through sickness: the flu. Some of Forrest's biggest moments came on the football field, sprinting down the turf like he was born to run. But what the audience didn't see was that Tom Hanks was sick, fighting the flu the entire time those scenes were filmed. He had to run the full length of the field again and again, take after take, while feverish and weak. Every sprint was exhausting, but the camera needed consistency. Hanks pushed through, delivering the performance without letting his illness show. That quiet determination mirrors Forrest himself, a man who just keeps going, no matter the odds. On screen, it looks like pure athletic triumph. Behind the scenes, it was sheer willpower keeping the actor on his feet. And while the flu may have drained him, another part of the film relied on draining something else entirely: the power of movie magic, used to take away what wasn't really gone. Gruesome shooting conditions. The scenes where Forrest runs across America look effortless on screen. Wide landscapes, iconic backdrops, Forrest just jogging as if nothing in the world could slow him down. But behind those shots was a brutal reality. Tom Hanks had to film them over 27 straight days, constantly moving from one part of the country to another. He'd shoot for hours in Utah, then be flown to Arizona, then shipped off to Montana with barely any rest in between. Costumes, makeup, running, over and over until exhaustion blurred everything together. By the time Hank sat down for the quiet bench monologues, the scenes that carried the heart of the story, he was completely drained. Imagine memorizing pages of dialogue when your body is begging to collapse. Hanks himself admitted he struggled to focus, stumbling through lines with almost no energy left. On screen, though, none of that shows. The fatigue you see in Forrest's eyes looks like acting, but it was real, and it gave those scenes a raw edge the audience could feel. The toll of that run left its mark, but the next challenge wasn't physical at all. It was something far more subtle: Lieutenant Dan's disability. Lieutenant Dan's story is one of the most powerful in Forrest Gump, a proud soldier who loses his legs in Vietnam and struggles to find meaning afterward. On screen, it looks devastatingly real, but in truth, Gary Sinise never lost his legs at all. The effect was a groundbreaking piece of visual trickery for 1994. Sinise wore blue fabric around his legs, and the VFX team digitally erased them frame by frame. At the time, this kind of seamless CGI was rare, and it stunned audiences. But the visuals alone didn't make Lieutenant Dan unforgettable. It was Sinise's performance, the anger, the despair, the slow climb toward peace. He showed a man stripped of his identity as a soldier, then forced to rebuild his life from nothing. Critics praised him for bringing both raw bitterness and quiet dignity to the role. The combination of effects and acting made Lieutenant Dan more than just a character. For many veterans, he became a symbol of survival, someone who reflected their own battles off the battlefield. It's no wonder this role cemented Sinise's career and left fans deeply moved. And while this emotional weight gave the film depth, another iconic sequence almost never existed at all. The run sequence. The run across America is one of Forrest Gump's most iconic sequences. 7 minutes of pure silence, landscapes flying by. Forrest running simply because he feels like it. But what fans didn't know is that the studio didn't even want to pay for it. Paramount thought the idea was too expensive, too indulgent, and tried to cut it. Director Robert Zemeckis refused. To him, the run was essential, a meditation on grief, purpose, and Forrest's place in the world. When the studio wouldn't budge, Zemeckis turned to his star. Together, he and Tom Hanks split the cost themselves, paying out of pocket to make sure the sequence was shot. In return, both agreed to take a bigger share of the film's profits if it succeeded. It was a risky move. If the movie failed, they would have lost millions. But the gamble paid off. The run not only became one of the film's most memorable stretches, it cemented Forrest as a cultural icon, spawning t-shirts, slogans, and even real-life imitators who tried to retrace his steps. And while that run may have captured America's imagination, the most famous moment in the film wasn't written at all. It came from Tom Hanks himself, in a blooper that became history. The famous line was a blooper. Some of Forrest Gump's lines are etched into movie history, but the most famous one of all wasn't even in the script. When Tom Hanks sat down on the bench and introduced himself with the line,
My name's Forrest Gump. People call me Forrest Gump.
he was improvising. It was a slip, a blooper, the kind of thing most directors would cut and reshoot, but Robert Zemeckis kept it in. That small stumble turned into the heartbeat of the character. It captured Forrest's innocence, his literal way of speaking, and his ability to turn even the simplest phrase into something unforgettable. Fans repeated it endlessly. Comedians parodied it, and it became one of the most quoted lines of the 1990s, all from a mistake that wasn't meant to happen. It shows how sometimes the magic of a movie isn't planned. It just happens. And speaking of what might have been, Forrest's story almost didn't end where the film did. Because for years, a sequel was sitting in development, and the details of what it included are nothing short of shocking. The sequel that never happened. As perfect as Forrest Gump feels on its own, Hollywood once had plans to keep the story going. In 1995, after the movie's massive success, author Winston Groom released a follow-up novel called Gump & Co. And for a while, a film sequel was in active development. But this time, the story took a strange turn. Instead of Forrest quietly weaving through history, the sequel was almost self-aware. In the book, Forrest complains about how Hollywood adapted his life, calling out inaccuracies in the movie itself. At one point, he even meets Tom Hanks, the actor playing him. The plot went further offbeat. The Bubba Gump Shrimp Company collapses, Forrest ends up broke, working odd jobs and trying to raise his son. He even winds up hawking fake encyclopedias on the road. There were moments of humor, tragedy, and surreal encounters, but it lacked the magic spark of the original. The script floated around Hollywood for years, but after 9/11, producers felt its themes wouldn't resonate the same way. Slowly, it faded into development hell. In the end, the sequel never happened, and maybe that's the best blooper of all. Because some stories are meant to stand alone, untouched, and unforgettable. Forrest Gump is remembered as a flawless classic, but as you've seen, even the greatest films hide mistakes, risks, and happy accidents. And if you enjoyed uncovering these hidden details, there's another story Hollywood doesn't want you to miss. Click the video on your screen right now to watch next. Don't forget to like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss.